Thank you, Marvin. Today our guest is Mr. Terry Sacka. He is a chief strategist and analyst for Cornerstone Asset Metals. And I'll let him tell you more about that as we get into the program. He is the host of the Wealth Transfer, a syndicated television broadcast shown across the United States on cable and other Christian television networks and stations, where they teach biblical principles, global economics, and protecting and preserving your family, ministry, and churches, principles and about wealth. He is an accredited asset management specialist with multiple financial accreditations. And what is really impressive to me, Terry, is that you are an Army specialist with a NATO secret clearance in nuclear warfare, along with the National Defense Medal from Iraq. His experience with global mining and applied world economics gives him a unique view of the real and deceptive global state of affairs and an outside perspective on the egregious violations to our constitutional framework. Terry, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much.
It's great to have you, and I know that you were one of our main speakers at the conference we just held in Gettysburg, and we enjoyed having you there, and I know people were really impressed. And certainly we were happy to have you. Terry, I know you speak on a lot of different subjects, and we're going to be speaking on more subjects and other programs. But today we want to talk about or discuss the things of what's happening in the world. I don't think anybody really understands unless they're on the inside like you're on the inside. Just a peripheral look at today's news and the financial sections and so forth, we don't get a clear picture of what's going on. But what we want to discuss today is the orchestrated global attack on the dollar's dominance. Tell us about that.
Well, and that's interesting because we in America really don't know. Well, some people are catching on that that's actually something taking place. There are people who are concerned. It seems to be a smaller fragment of the Christian population, I think, that are more spiritually sensitive people, that are more praying people, that are aware. Now, there's a lot of internet narrative out there that says, here's what's collapsing, the global collapse, this collapse. It's not about that. There's, one thing in the world I think we've all learned is there's extremes. There's extremes on both sides of the spectrum. This isn't about a complete anarchy, total collapse scenario. This is not what we're talking about. But we are talking about a significant shift in the global financial order. And this is real. So take the hype from one side and hype from the other. Let's meet in the middle. A lot of times I think we find in general, somewhere in the middle is where we find a lot of that truth, right?
So we're not talking about conspiracy here.
Not at all.
Conspiracy theory. This is data-driven.
This is purely data-driven, and it's not just data-driven. There are some theory on what would be the purpose behind actions taking place right now by other countries and treaties and different relationships financially. But it's not conspiracy in any way. This is actually on the ground what's taking place that happens really to every reserve currency all through history. If we go back even to the 1400s, every reserve currency had an X amount of time where they were in power as a dominant reserve currency for trade and finance. We just happen to be at the tail end of what we've created in the 70s known as the Federal Reserve Note. And, no currency goes down without a fight. No one really just says, okay, let's just give it up. It's usually some event that takes place that puts so much pressure on that dominant currency that there has to be change. And lo and behold, it's really been going on for some time, but we have seen dramatic changes in the last, really since 9/11.
Okay, so you're saying that actually a nation follows its currency? If the currency goes down and the nation follows it?
Oh, absolutely, because the currency value really indicates our standard of living and our buying power. So from my point of view, my purpose at Cornerstone that God really mandated that we establish for the reason Cornerstone was built is to protect the kingdom's assets for the future of what's coming. If we are in the wrong system of money in the kingdom, we're not properly protected against what is coming because we're not given the right information, Our media is not giving us true news in any way. So if we're not getting our news from a Christian source that has truth behind it, you probably don't even realize what's taking place.
So what we're talking about here is preparing. We don't know when the Lord's coming back. We don't know when the rapture is going to take place, and so between now and then, we actually have a godly mandate that we take care of our families and so forth. I mean, if you don't, you're worse than an infidel according to Scripture. So we have a mandate from God to prepare. And that has to do with the financial system, because the financial system controls everything, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And not just prepare. I mean, it's talking, the Bible gets into leaving an inheritance to your children and your children's children. Well, if we in the kingdom are in the wrong money source, which I hate to say it, we've really been doing it all along, we have been victim to the whole fiat, fake currency, Federal Reserve note concept, along with the rest of society. We should have been aware that God gave us dominion over things of the earth. So as the simplest form, now we can't store gasoline in our backyard, or now some really good Christians are farmers, and of course they get that concept because there's your earth and your food. But some of the easiest forms of wealth and asset protection was always really gold and silver, and mainly silver in the Bible. And so there's a strong psychological argument in the financial world from bankers, accountants, financial advisors. I myself am a formal financial advisor. I understand. They are all trained and educated by the system of the central banking world. It's all not for Christ, that's for sure.
Okay. Some may not understand what you're talking about. You're talking about a fiat currency system. Would you explain that?
Fiat really means fake. All throughout history of...
So we have fake cars?
We have fiat currency, yeah. We have fake dollar bills.
Yes.
Basically because the mandate established by the Constitution says, Article 1, Section 8, that Congress has a right to coin money. Well, if you go to the Webster's Dictionary back in the day, when they wrote the Constitution, money was defined as grains of silver, grains of gold. What's interesting about that is the very definition of dollar is grains of silver. So we always were silver and gold as in money. We went through 3 or 4 periods in our history where we went bankrupt because we printed more paper money that the gold didn't back up. But of course, in the 60s and 70s, this whole thing came to a screeching halt, and we were tricked into believing that we didn't need gold to back up our currency anymore. Thus, we went on what they call fiat. And ever since then, they've made a campaign to get the whole world on fiat, which is really fake currency because it's not backed up by historical, tangible asset. All through history, to 600 Lydia BC, they've always been backed up by historical hard currency assets. Nations always fell once the fiat went to zero. And it really, all fiat currencies all through history have always gone to zero. To think that it's not going to happen this time around, we're just kidding ourselves. And it's not that we have a complete failure of the system. We will redesign it in some capacity. I'm sure we just had a new fiat or a new currency development 40, 50 years ago, you see. We just don't remember the current population. So.
Well, I remember, I'm old enough to remember when we had silver certificates.
Yes, and you were taking that paper dollar to the bank and getting a real silver coin.
Real silver. But they replaced all those with Federal Reserve notes, which is and you get in trouble for counterfeiting one of those when in fact they're a counterfeit.
It's interesting too because, and I love that you have that memory, because this is my whole point here. If we in the kingdom had stayed in what I call constitutional money all along, just taken in the mid-70s, if a ministry or a church, because the purpose of Cornerstone really was to get the kingdom to understand the dynamics of money, get us in the right assets to properly protect our ministries, our churches, our IRAs, our 401ks, our retirement accounts, our savings. If you take the 70s where we had the paper dollar was a silver coin, they were equal. They both bought you 5 gallons of gas. Let's say they were about 20 cents a gallon. So at that time they were equal. They both bought you the same gas. Today, if you take your silver coin, let's say you saved the silver instead of the paper money. If you take your silver coin today, sell it for currency. Do you know not only can you buy the same 5 gallons of gas that you did back in the 70s, you can buy an astonishing 10 gallons of gas, 9 gallons. You have almost double the buying power by hanging on to the constitutional dollar, which was silver. Take the paper Federal Reserve note out of your pocket. How many gallons of gas can you buy today? Not even a half, right?
No.
So we in the kingdom, if we would have recognized this principle from the get-go, instead of being distracted by the lust of the flesh that the world was offering, and of course we had war at the time too, and we stayed in silver as our component of storage for the future, retirement, and church and ministry, we would be significantly wealthier. Best example, take $100,000 in the 70s. Today, in paper money, it's still $100,000, right? But it doesn't buy you the same, does it? Not even close. Like a college education at Harvard was $2,500 a year back then. Today, it's like $65,000, $75,000. Yet take those same $100,000 instead of saving it in paper. If we would have saved it in silver, an astonishing $1.8 million. Wow, for the kingdom, right?
So there were people then who understood this process that latched on to silver.
Yeah,
some corporations or some central bank systems or something?
Mainly the central banks actually were selling. The reason people, I think, shied away from silver is, of course, the banking world made us believe that money isn't tangible in a sense of gold or silver. The paper dollar was worthy. That, of course, was a big psychological deception, but those that did hang on to it, central banks were selling. We had roughly 12 billion ounces of silver above ground back in that day, in the 70s. We had a lot of it. So you would even go travel abroad and you would hear the terms junk silver, or it's junk. Right, because we had a lot. Well, today we have barely 700, maybe a billion ounces above ground left. And people say, well, where is it? Every single piece of electronic components, medical technology, satellite systems, bacteria fighting. There are so many uses for silver beyond money that we've consumed it. It's gone. And we're not mining it anymore. So the price you're seeing isn't indicative to its actual demand. Silver really is the second largest consumed commodity in the world next to oil. And none of us knew that. So I call them the older timers, that's what they call themselves, they would be teased, because I talked to some of them, they were teased about storing silver. And they all say the same thing, look who's laughing now. Because the silver they've been storing for the last 30 years, granted it didn't move much in price, we just happen to be at a reckoning period in history. I couldn't say this 20 years ago, but today I can. We're at a very serious cross point in history, reckoning point in history of our dollar dominance on the world stage. And there are numerous reasons why that we'll get into. But the bigger point to understand first is why silver as constitutional money. We just outlined why it was important to always keep it as a kingdom asset. It doesn't change going forward today for churches, ministries, and retirement accounts, IRAs, because there is a reckoning coming, not just on the supply due to industrial demand, but as financial protection against the I would say almost annihilation of the dollar's buying power. And we don't have to convince a lot of people that, do we? We all buy groceries and clothes and things, and they're so much more expensive than they used to be.
Right. The global dominance of the dollar as a reserve currency since, in the 60s maybe, that I want you to explain what it means to have a reserve currency. And the United States dollar has been the major supplier for that. Explain how that works.
Yes, actually, if you just we'll go one step back where England and the British pound was the reserve currency. Now World War II comes in. Because we won World War II, We were able to set the stage. Our military took it. We won the world stage. We then said, here's the deal. We hold 70% of the world's gold. They gave us all their gold to fight Hitler. So instead of just sending gold back and forth for trade, for goods and services, why don't we just send the paper? And it was reasonable. Now, the English pound was reserve currency for a long time. But after World War II, we became the reserve currency, meaning every nation in the world used the American dollar to buy goods and services. So if I'm Germany and I want to buy a TV from Japan, they would take their local currencies, buy $1, and then do the transaction. Right. That's what reserve currency meant. But then it morphed into a bigger reserve currency definition. But what's interesting is in the 60s, the French president de Gaulle caught on to this. He said, wait a minute, you're printing more paper money, dollars, than gold you have backing it up. I want our gold back. They were redeeming so much gold back to Europe that we knew in the United States, Nixon knew that the world would find out we were insolvent. We were bankrupt. So he stealthily convinced the American people and the world that we don't need gold to back up our currency. It's going to be temporary, he said, even though they knew it was permanent. And they convinced the world that we could be on the fiat currency and we can be trusted. But they had redeemed most of the gold back then at that time. So we had 70% of the world's wealth. Our reserve status then became dependent on our military strength after World War II and the fact that everyone used dollars for trade and finance. But then it morphed. In the 70s, we made an arrangement with Saudi Arabia. Now, this is huge, Bob, and why it's going to lead to current events today and why folks will understand that if we see what's happening in the Middle East today, what the BRICS nations of China, Russia, Brazil, India are doing, and they put it all together and realize that this agreement I'm getting ready to explain to you is in trouble, they'll understand why it's vital to be protected at the church level, ministry level, retirement account level, and personal savings level from the fiat system. Because in the 70s, we made an arrangement with Saudi Arabia. We said, we will protect you militarily from all of the enemies around you. In turn, because you control the oil, the OPEC nations, you demand that every country in the world buy oil with an American dollar. Well, that guaranteed that every country needed to own American dollars to buy oil, and it guaranteed that the U.S. Treasury bonds, U.S. bonds that they issued, these IOUs, debt instruments, would be bought because everybody needs energy. So they all needed U.S. dollars. Great system, to be honest. It worked. That's what brought the American boom and prosperity out through the 70s, 80s, 90s, even though we had recessions. That's why we have this whole concept of a great American lifestyle and why we all, even the poorest of us, live like kings to the world. Because this arrangement made our dollar value so strong and so in demand that we holding it here in the United States became wealthy overnight.
Right. Well, then that means that if they hold less respect for America, they hold less respect for the dollar.
Well, even deeper than that is currently today, Saudi Arabia is in tremendous trouble. The king died. His brother takes over. They're on the verge of a coup. The youth are not happy in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is probably one of the wickedest countries in the region for human rights. And yet they control the petrodollar, and that's why I think we've cozied up to them so much. Yet most of the 9/11 terrorists were Saudi Arabian.
Right.
So the thing is, they control the OPEC petrodollar deal. Well, the youth in Saudi Arabia are not happy. They're actually talking within the next 60 to 90 days, there will not be a surprise to see a silent coup where one of the other family members takes over. The younger generation of Saudi is more inclined to be involved with Chinese, Russian, and the East. Matter of fact, Russia or China just put a tremendous tens of billions into Saudi Arabia for one of the world's largest oil refineries. Now, this gets deeper, of course, but this is why all of a sudden Syria is in play. The Middle East, this is why we went to wars, I really believe. When the left side said it was about oil, they're not kidding. They actually were accurate. It just wasn't oil as in oil. It was petrodollar. If we lose the ability to have the petrodollar, meaning every country needs a dollar to buy oil, we lose our standard of living. That dollar value can drop in half easily. And if we in the kingdom are storing our assets in the fiat world, meaning stocks, bonds, paper, when that takes place, we will lose significant ability to keep the kingdom afloat, to spread the gospel, feed the poor, and save our savings.
Right, and I know that the U.S. dollar is under terrible attack as reserve currency, which means, as you have said, that if one country wanted to buy from another country, they had to get U.S. dollars first and then buy that product, whatever they wanted, whether it's Russia and China, whatever. But now then, it looks like China is the one who's going to challenge the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency. And if I understand it correctly, and you can tell me if this is correct or not, the IMF has already accepted the Chinese yuan as a reserve currency?
Well, they're actually discussing it right now. Many believe it's taking place, and yes, although I find that interesting because we really are the IMF. IMF is just a collection of countries in the West that have a piggy bank, let's say, to help finance issues around the world. Well, the Chinese are already developed their own counter IMF called the AIIB, but that's another conversation. But what they're doing right now this month in November is discussing whether to bring the yuan in the IMF basket of reserve currencies. Because a lot of people don't realize the American dollar is not the only reserve currency. There's actually a handful of them, and it's the euro, of course, and there's a couple others. If the yuan gets in that IMF basket, it doesn't mean the dollar collapses, but it does mean significant market share for trade and finance are now going to the yuan. What's interesting is just last week, well, maybe a few days ago, they announced the Chinese are directly pegging with the Swiss franc. That's a really big story that we average Americans doing our job are just going to go right over our head. But what that means is they're preparing for what we're talking about here. If they don't go in the IMF, it doesn't even matter. They've set up their counter mirror IMF. The point is they're making a move against the dollar, and they're not doing it alone. They're with Russia, India, China, South Africa, and even our allies are members of the AIIB bank.
So what will that do with the relationship with Saudi Arabia when we no longer need them to uphold the petrodollar?
That goes away. Something else is going on that's way over a lot of our heads because nothing makes sense. Like, for instance, we're doing this deal with Iran that is absolutely insane. They're laughing and mocking at us all along the way. Yet Iran is the direct enemy of Saudi Arabia. Yet Saudi Arabia was just here securing a massive arms deal to help protect, because Iran is right now in Yemen causing civil war, and Saudi Arabia is at war this very minute with Yemen because Iran is in there. And this is just the beginning. Now that we unleashed all this money to Iran, which I still to this day can't imagine why we allowed this. Iran now has the ability to, they already are in, because I have the maps, sightings of them. They're already in Iraq, controlling central to northern Iraq, and they're partnering up with a trilateral of China and Russia regarding Syria and ISIS.
So this is more than just a Shia-Sunni conflict.
Oh, it's bigger than that. Because we unleashed Iran into this world stage, we've put them in partnership with China and Russia. When we came away from the United Nations meeting just about a month ago, I don't know what they said. I would love to be the fly on that wall. But the very next week, Russia moves in massive troops, air power, firepower, missiles, right into Syria to back up Assad. Now, what's this doing? In the bigger picture, they're setting up to take control of the Middle East. We have walked away from the narrative leadership of the Middle East. And what is that going to mean to us? If they control the narrative, they're going to influence Saudi Arabia. Why would Saudi Arabia keep the petrodollar as the leader? Why not make it petro yuan or petro something else? And I know it's close because there are already dozen to 24 international agreements between the Chinese yuan and other nations and their currencies. If that happens, our dollar value will plummet in buying power, meaning we in the kingdom, ministry, and individual retirement accounts and savings better be in the right asset to take advantage when the dollar's buying power drops immensely so we can increase our buying power for the future.
And so this sets up the stage and puts it in motion, actually, the invasion of Israel in Ezekiel 38 and 39.
Isn't that interesting? And what's even more mind-blowing is Erdogan, who is the president of Turkey. They were on the verge of losing that election. He is extremely pro-Islam, and to the point of Sharia law in Turkey. And he won an astounding election overthrow just a week ago. That is really big because that sets up exactly what you just said biblically.
Right, and he is pro-Islamic law.
Major pro-Islamic law to the point where he will not be, and I contend you're not going to find them the best of NATO allies here soon.
Absolutely. Well, Terry, it's been great having you on our program today, and we will have more programs subsequent to this one. We want you to be sure and listen for those. And we thank you for being our guest today, Terry Sacka, a chief strategist and analyst for Cornerstone Asset Metals. And we are we're cooperating with Cornerstone. You have a final word.
Well, I was just saying, if people have questions and they want to understand some of this and be educated, because our main purpose is education, they can go to cornerstoneassetmetals.com to our website. They can register for information to get a package, and it just talks about these trade agreements and some of the things we're saying. Or they can give us a call, and we'll help educate them on making some decisions to be better diversified with their assets. Because really, in the end of the day, we in the kingdom, the best investment is in education.
All right. Thank you. It's been great having you on our program today, Terry. And we look forward to the next one.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. Okay. And we can do more.